quitsmokingweed.com, the podcast on Spotify.
Almost everyone says the exact same thing first when they decide it's time to stop. They tell themselves, I will just cut down slowly. It sounds gentler, it sounds smarter, and honestly significantly less brutal than stopping outright.
Yeah, it definitely seems like the logical approach on paper.
But for most daily users, tapering is actually the harder road. And let us be entirely honest with ourselves here. Very often it is not a plan at all. It is just a way to put the quit date somewhere in the future that, never actually arrives.
That is a harsh truth, but it is incredibly common. Today, we need to look directly at the honest trade-offs of cold turkey versus tapering. We are going to identify who tapering actually suits and explain exactly why the method you pick matters far less than the structure you build around it.
Because people get so fixated on the method, right? I mean, I know I have certainly looked for loopholes when trying to change a difficult habit. They want a loophole, believing that the right choice will somehow magically spare them from the discomfort.
Exactly. But before we even debate which method is better, we really have to look at why that intuitive choice of tapering usually fails in execution. When you decide to just step down your usage, you hit a massive mechanical problem with cannabis itself.
Right. You are dealing with a substance that has no standardized dose.
Precisely. You run into a fundamental measurement problem. We can compare this to nicotine replacement therapy to see the difference really clearly. If you are using a nicotine patch to quit smoking, you have a mathematically defined step-down level.
So you might move from a 21 milligram patch to a 14 milligram patch.
Right, and you know with scientific certainty exactly what less means. Cannabis has absolutely nothing like that. There is no comparable, reliable 2 milligram equivalent that you can track with that kind of precision.
And, because you cannot measure it accurately, you are forced into guessing what less actually means on any given day. You are taking a whiff of a vape or packing a bowl or breaking off a piece of an edible and deciding in the moment if it counts as a reduction.
And you are making those subjective guesses while you are actively craving the substance, which is the really problematic part.
It is exactly like trying to restrict a diet by eyeballing your portion sizes while you are absolutely starving.
Yeah.
I mean, your judgment about what constitutes a smaller portion is being heavily shaped by the very thing you are trying to restrict.
That analogy hits the core of the issue perfectly. When you are genuinely hungry, a much larger portion suddenly looks perfectly reasonable. When you are craving THC, a slightly deeper inhale or holding the smoke in just a second longer feels, completely justified in the moment.
You just tell yourself it is still less than you used last week.
Yes, but the cognitive toll of that specific situation is massive. Tapering requires you to keep the habit at the absolute center of your attention all day long.
Right. You wake up and you are immediately negotiating with yourself. You are asking yourself how much is allowed today, or if you should wait until 5 o'clock. Or maybe, 4:30 is close enough.
And you force yourself into an exhausting, continuous daily negotiation. That negotiation drains the exact psychological energy you need to successfully separate from the habit. Think about the sheer mental bandwidth it takes to constantly monitor your own behavior when the baseline for measurement is entirely subjective.
It is completely exhausting. And most people find that this self-monitoring quietly slips the moment they are under stress. You have a difficult day at work, your stress spikes, and the amount you use creeps back up just a little bit to compensate.
Oh, absolutely. The stress response overrides the tapering plan almost immediately for a lot of people.
And every single one of those small slips erodes your confidence. You set an intention for the morning, you fail to meet that exact intention by the evening, and you go to bed feeling a profound sense of defeat. You feel like you are failing before you have even officially quit.
Which brings us to the alternative. Because that daily negotiation is so draining, the primary benefit of quitting cold turkey is that all of that cognitive and emotional work happens on one specific day. You make a definitive choice exactly once.
You are not waking up the next morning and renegotiating the terms of your quit attempt. The debate is over. The rule is established.
Exactly. And another huge advantage here is that the withdrawal clock has a clear, undeniable start. When you taper, the timeline is completely murky. You exist in this frustrating gray zone.
Because the symptoms are spread out, and you never really know if you are in withdrawal or just experiencing the baseline anxiety of your habit. With cold turkey, you know exactly when the rough stretch hits, and you can track when it is going to ease up.
Yes. And there is an important medical reality we have to clarify regarding stopping abruptly, because fear of physical danger is what drives a lot of people toward tapering. Cannabis withdrawal is incredibly uncomfortable, but it is not physically hazardous.
I am going to stop you right there and push back slightly on the word uncomfortable. Calling it uncomfortable might be a massive understatement for someone in the thick of it. For many daily users, going cold turkey feels incredibly brutal. I mean, the insomnia, the night sweats, the absolute lack of appetite, it can feel completely overwhelming.
I am absolutely not minimizing the severity of those symptoms. The distress is very real, and I hear how difficult it is from people all the time. But I am speaking specifically about medical danger.
Like the difference between feeling awful and actually being in physical danger.
Precisely. If we look at alcohol withdrawal, stopping suddenly can be incredibly dangerous. It requires medical supervision because it can induce seizures and delirium tremens. Your central nervous system can literally overload. Stopping weed abruptly does not pose that kind of physical danger to your body.
Okay, I see the distinction. So the risk argument, the medical necessity that dictates a taper for other substances, well, it mostly does not apply to cannabis. The medical safety of quitting weed cold turkey is precisely why it is on the table as the most reliable option for the vast majority of people.
Exactly. You are going to feel awful for a bit, but your life is not in danger. Recognizing that distinction is often what gives people the courage to just set a date and step off the ledge.
But we cannot make a blanket rule for everyone, can we? We have established why cold turkey wins out for the majority, but we really need to address the specific scenarios where a taper is a legitimate, reasonable strategy rather than just, an avoidance tactic.
Right. There are two main exceptions. First, tapering makes sense for genuinely heavy long-term users. We are talking about individuals who have been using multiple times daily from morning until night for many consecutive years.
So the people whose baseline has been altered for a very long time.
Yes. For these users, the brain's chemistry is so deeply adapted to the constant presence of cannabinoids that the acute drop can cause severe anxiety and emotional volatility. A taper in this specific scenario can soften the initial physical landing.
And the second exception would be for someone who has already tried cold turkey before and found the first week not just distressing, but genuinely destabilizing. I mean, if the initial drop prevents you from functioning at a basic level, like keeping your job or taking care of your kids, then a different approach is absolutely warranted.
Yes, if you have a history of severe panic or depressive crashes when stopping abruptly, you definitely need a different strategy. But in those specific cases, there is a very strict rule for tapering.
Let me guess. It cannot go on forever.
It absolutely cannot. It must be a short, defined schedule. It should last 1 or 2 weeks at the absolute most, and it must have a fixed, non-negotiable end date.
Because open-ended tapering is just delay wearing a strategy's clothes. I have known people who claim they were tapering for several months without ever actually stopping. It just became a slightly modified daily habit, and eventually their usage crept right back up to where it started.
If you do not have a hard stop date, you are not actually tapering. You are just managing your addiction differently. Now, during a strict 1 or 2 week taper, CBD can actually be utilized to help.
But we are talking specifically about CBD completely without THC, right?
Correct. Using a CBD product completely without THC can soften the physical anxiety of the step-down process.
We should be clear, though. CBD is not a magic bullet. It will not eliminate your cravings entirely, and it will not prevent withdrawal symptoms from happening altogether.
No, it will not. But it interacts with your endocannabinoid system in a way that can make the transition less abrasive, particularly by reducing the physical sensations of anxiety and helping slightly with the sleep disruption.
Okay, so whether a person chooses to drop abruptly or use a strict 2-week taper, the method they choose is really just the entry point. The method is just a small lever. What actually decides the outcome is how you navigate the specific biological timeline that follows.
This is the most crucial part of our discussion today. What carries people through is having a set date, a prepared first week, and a strong structure to handle the biological phases of quitting. Because neither method allows you to skip the hardest parts of the process, you are going to have to face the timeline regardless of how you start.
People often assume the beginning is the hardest part. The acute physical symptoms are definitely front-loaded, but the emotionally hardest stretch is actually not the opening days. Let us break down these specific phases so you know exactly what your body is doing.
That is a great idea. The first phase is the release phase, which covers day 1 to about day 5. During this phase, your body is dealing with the immediate physical shock of the substance being gone.
The physical symptoms are highest here, right? We're talking about the night sweats, the vivid rebound dreams, the total loss of appetite, and that sharp irritability. Your body is physically purging and reacting to the sudden absence of a chemical it heavily relies on.
Yes, it is a rough 5 days. But then you transition into what is called the resilience phase. This runs from day 5 across roughly 3 weeks. And this is the part that catches so many people completely off guard.
Because this is actually the emotionally hardest phase of the entire process.
It completely blindsides people. They get through the first 5 days, the night sweats start to subside, they manage to eat a full meal without feeling nauseous, and they think they are totally out of the woods. And then they hit an absolute emotional wall. They feel profound apathy, deep depression, or intense, unprovoked anger.
Wait, that feels counterintuitive. Why does the emotional difficulty actually peak after the initial physical shock wears off at day 5? What is physically happening in the brain to cause that delayed reaction?
It all comes down to the ECS, the endocannabinoid system. This system is a vast network of receptors throughout your brain and body that helps regulate homeostasis. It controls your mood, your stress response, your appetite, and your emotional equilibrium.
And your body naturally produces its own cannabinoids to keep this system running smoothly, correct?
Yes. Your body produces natural emotional regulators. The most famous one is anandamide.
The neurotransmitter people sometimes call the bliss molecule, right?
That is the one. When you use THC regularly, you are flooding your ECS with a massive artificial dose of cannabinoids. Your body is smart and highly efficient. It recognizes this flood, and it essentially says that it does not need to do this work anymore.
So it stops producing its own anandamide at normal levels. It downregulates its own natural emotional regulators because the THC is doing all the heavy lifting.
Precisely. So when you quit, whether cold turkey or after a taper, the external flood of THC completely stops. But your body has not started making its own anandamide again yet.
You are basically operating with a severe deficit of your natural emotional shock absorbers.
Exactly. During the resilience phase, your body is desperately attempting to rebuild its own anandamide signaling. But that rebuilding takes time. So for roughly 3 weeks, you are walking around with a severely depleted ECS.
This is why you feel incredibly fragile. Minor inconveniences feel like massive catastrophes. Things that used to bring you joy feel completely flat and uninteresting.
Yes, and understanding this is vital. It is not a moral failing or a lack of willpower. It is a literal mechanical deficit in your brain's chemistry. You are lacking the chemical required to feel baseline contentment.
Which is why having a structure in place for this specific phase is completely non-negotiable. If you think the battle is won on day 5, you will probably relapse on day 12 when the emotional weight feels completely unbearable.
You have to understand that feeling terrible during this window actually means your brain is actively doing the heavy work of repairing itself.
That is a very powerful reframe. Feeling that emotional flatness is not a sign that life without weed is going to be awful forever. It is just a sign that your ECS is currently under construction. So what happens after this 3-week resilience phase?
Then you transition into the clarity phase. This runs from around week 3 toward week 7. The intense emotional volatility starts to smooth out. You will likely still have some sleep and mood issues lingering.
Because the brain takes a long time to fully recalibrate.
Right. But things slowly, noticeably improve. Your natural motivation begins to return as your anandamide levels stabilize. And then finally, you enter stabilization.
Which generally takes roughly 7 weeks with active support.
Yes, though we must be completely honest. For heavy, long-term users, true stabilization can take up to a few months. There is no magical finish line where you are suddenly perfectly fine forever in exactly 30 days.
But by the stabilization phase, the acute cravings are manageable, your sleep architecture is mostly repaired, and you have built new coping mechanisms to deal with stress. The crucial takeaway here is that neither quitting cold turkey nor tapering lets you skip that harder middle section.
Exactly. You have to pass through the resilience phase. Your ECS has to do the work of rebuilding, and that work takes a specific amount of time regardless of how you stopped. Build for the middle phase instead of negotiating with the beginning.
If you put all your energy into figuring out exactly how to step down your dose over 3 months, you are ignoring the biological reality of what happens when you finally reach 0.
The method is just how you start the clock. The structure is how you survive the time it takes for your brain to heal.
I want you to look closely at your current plan to quit. Look at the strategy you have mapped out in your head. Ask yourself honestly if you are actually building a structure to survive that hard middle phase, or if your tapering plan is just a quiet negotiation to grant yourself permission to use today. Are you preparing for the reality of the resilience phase, or are you just trying to avoid the discomfort of making a final decision?
The Release, Resilience, and Clarity program gives you the structure for exactly this. $20 a month at quit-smoking-weed.com.